Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for this session as we kick off our Distracted Driving Awareness Month. Just a couple of items before we get started. If you have your audio or video not on mute, if you'll go ahead and do that, and that will allow just a smooth webinar presentation for everyone. So again, if you don't have your audio muted, make sure you do that. And then if you have questions throughout the session, just type them in the chat. We'll monitor those and we'll address those at the end. So as we get started, I want to make an introduction of our presenters this morning. And we have a panel of speakers this morning. First, I'll introduce Katie Mueller. Katie has specialized in developing and implementing evidence-based countermeasure programs to bolster transportation safety for more than 20 years. She is a senior program manager with the National Safety Council, and she directs the Our Driving Concern programs. Next, we have Mr. John Teague. He is the operations and safety manager for Hughes Oilfield Transportation. He's also on the board of directors for the West Texas Safety Training Center, and he is the founder of the Compassionate Friends of West Texas, a support group for those who have lost a child. Next on the screen, you'll see Ryan McMahon. He is unfortunately not with us today due to an emergency. However, we are going to go through his slide deck so that you don't miss any important or vital information. And he is actually from Cambridge Mobile Telematics, and he is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Corporate Development. So his slides will be gone over as well. And then we have Miss Michelle May. Michelle has been a member of the Ohio.
Friday and out today with the area.
If we can have everyone mute their audio, please. Thank you. Okay, so Michelle has been a member of the Ohio Department of Transportation for more than 36 years. She's served in communication and program management roles. She manages ODOT's $185 million highway safety program. She also manages a statewide coalition of organizations focused on reducing traffic deaths and serious injuries. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and we're going to jump in and get started.
Thank you, Deanne. Thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. Like Deanne said, I'm Katie Mueller, and I lead the Our Driving Concern program here at National Safety Council. I just want to take a minute to thank the team that brought this together. I know that coordinating events like this is no small feat. So thank you to our presenters who are joining today and to the team that brought this webinar together. Hopefully you can get some great takeaways that you can take from your work to your workplace and implement solutions that have worked for others. Yesterday marked the start of National Distracted Driving Awareness Month. So all of us here at National Safety Council observe this and really invite all of you to take the opportunity to engage with your employees on discussions about how you can reduce distracted driving and help reduce crashes. Really, that's why we're here, is to talk about saving lives and implementing evidence-based strategies to reduce distraction in the car. Here at the National Safety Council, you'll hear us talk about a lot of strategies and a lot of ways that we work together to reduce distracted driving. And really, we focus these efforts on the three main types of distraction, which include visual distraction, manual distraction, and cognitive distraction, really focusing on the important task of driving. You'll hear lots of data today and lots of information on programs that have worked, impactful stories. And I think that just bringing it all together to think about these three types of distractions in the vehicle and how we can all work together to reduce distraction. So to kick us off this morning, I am happy to share, to introduce John Teague, who is going to be sharing his story of how distracted driving has impacted his family and in turn his life. So John, I'll leave it over to you to take it away.
I believe we've got a short video to show.
Great.
Vehicle was traveling eastbound on State Highway 302 here, and for an unknown reason, the vehicle left the roadway into the center median, and the driver of the vehicle overcorrected, which caused the vehicle to come back onto the roadway. And as the vehicle skids, it continues to come to face the other direction and slides off the roadway down the embankment.
Investigators say that wearing a seatbelt in this car crash played a major role between life and death. After rolling off of the highway, the car eventually landed right here. Now, the passenger, Chelsea Taylor, was wearing a seatbelt and survived. The driver, Dustin Teague, did not.
During the course of the vehicle rolling, the driver was ejected. He was not wearing a seatbelt.
Teague is just one of 3 others who have died since September after being ejected from vehicles when they weren't buckled up.
You're 90 to 95% more likely to be killed in a crash if you're not wearing your seatbelt.
While it's not certain if Teague would have survived had he worn a seatbelt, it's left his family and friends wondering just what would have happened had he been buckled up.
If he'd have just put it on, I mean, it could have just been minor injuries. Now he's not here.
For Sergeant Lewis, every death is startling, especially because he says wearing a seatbelt is the easiest way to help you survive a crash.
It's definitely a shocking thing because all it takes is one motion, put that seatbelt on, and you're still here, your loved ones still have you.
It takes 3 seconds to save a life forever.
For 23 years, we've done something on this day. He was born on a Sunday, and he died on a Sunday, and his birthday happened to fall on a Sunday this year.
Dustin Del Brown Teague would have turned 23 years old today. Instead, his family was setting a cross on the side of the road where he died. Supporters came from far and wide, and for many, they too have lost a child.
My son died on October 5th on 191.
Perry Jeffrey was killed along with his wife Genevela by a drunk driver.
He was involved in the accident out on 385 at the Gardendale entrance on Cottonwood.
And 17-year-old Luke Brown was killed along with 2 other teens after pulling in front of a semi-truck. These parents have come together not only to celebrate Dustin's life, but console with the only people who know their pain.
As a mother, you have a forward momentum going with all your kids, and then all of a sudden that's just stopped, and it's just you still want to keep going, and there's nowhere to go.
For many of them, it's tragedy that brought them together to find comfort.
It helps a lot actually coming here today. For the first time, I feel like I've connected with other people that feel the way I do, because after my son died, I felt like I was on a different plane.
You need somebody to talk to, because if you don't talk to nobody, it's like you'll lose your mind.
I know people are sitting there going, oh man, that would be horrible. I can't even imagine. And you can't imagine until you have to go through it.
And the Teague family just wants to share the messages with every parent.
All these families had different messages. Some of them were don't drink and drive. Some of them were don't text and drive.
If you got kids, talk to them. Always talk to them about it, because if you don't, you'll wind up like me.
We still there?
You're on, John.
I'd like to start out thanking National Safety Council for asking me to be a part of this today. It's been 14 years and it does not get any easier. Little background. I grew up in Odessa, met my wife here, went to school. We've been married almost 35 years. Started a family, Dustin being our oldest of our 3 kids. When we lost Dustin the morning of October 10th of 2010, it changed our lives forever. Um, our daughter was a junior in high school. All three of our kids played ice hockey here growing up. The boys both played for the high school team, and Devin grew up in the juniors team and then joined her brothers playing on the high school team at the age of 14. Devin received a full ride scholarship to Buffalo State for girls hockey. She was also chosen to go to Utah at the age of 14 for the Junior Olympic tryouts for girls hockey. She was ranked number 17 in the state of Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Colorado in girls hockey. Destin had always told her, choose where you want to go and I will follow. That dream for her came crashing down the day she lost her brother. When she graduated from high school, she turned her full ride scholarship down to stay closer to mom and dad. To this day, our son, Chase, will not talk about his brother's accident. Dustin and his wife, Chelsea, had a 1.5-year-old son at the time of Dustin's accident. He will turn 15 this month. What goes through your mind when you're losing a child, especially one that has a child of their own, is, am I going to get to see that child growing up? And we had those thoughts. My wife Shannon and I had visited with an attorney to see what our rights were. And in the state of Texas, there are no grandparents' rights. Our daughter-in-law could have packed up and took Caden, and we possibly could have not seen him growing up. We've been very fortunate that she's been a part of our lives the last 14 years. We now introduce her as our daughter. She did move on and marry a man that took a while for us to cozy up to. His name is also Dustin. That was a little hard to take in. But we introduce him as our son-in-law now, and he's been a great father to our grandson. I preach more on the devastation that an accident like this happens on a family instead of the statistics and the numbers. Dustin was one of 13 that we lost here in a 6-week period, all due to distracted driving of one form or another. In Dustin's case, it was alcohol, it was drugs. There was texting and arguing going on in the car at the time of the accident. We had received a text message from Chelsea that morning, a little after 5 a.m., that he keeps jerking the wheel. They had gone to a party the night before and thought that they had sobered up enough to drive home. And this accident happened about 2 miles from the house. That morning, my wife checked out. I was left alone to deal with all this, final arrangements, paying for a funeral. My accident insurance would not pay because of Dustin's blood alcohol. Dustin's life insurance through his employer would not pay because Dustin had left it to a minor child. And it goes into trust till the Caden turns of age. So at this time, I'm worrying about how I'm gonna bury my son. I have to go out and get a loan to pay for my son's funeral. And I can tell you funerals are not cheap. I don't want any parent to have to go through this. Me and my wife are on call anytime anyone needs us. We started a support group for parents that have lost a child because we tried counseling and that didn't work for us. It didn't seem like anybody understood what we were going through as parents who have lost a child. We had no idea that this support group would grow like it has. Our monthly meetings, we have anywhere from 50 to 100 families that attend our meetings. The number one denominator is we've all lost a child and we understand what the other one's going through. We will go anywhere we're asked to speak. We've been to the state capitol. We helped get the cell phone texting law passed in Texas. Been to Washington, D.C., churches, schools, anywhere we're asked to talk, we're more than happy to help. I just don't want another family to have to go through this.
Thank you so much, John, and we so appreciate you sharing your family story with us today and the impact that it has on families. And we know that there are technologies and there are solutions and there are all kinds of things that can help us make better choices when it comes to driving under the influence, driving under the influence of, drugs and alcohol, but also under the influence of technology. And so all of those technologies are there to assist us. And it's all really up to the individual person to make that choice not to drive under the influence or distracted.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So next, I am here going to be, as Deanne mentioned, I'm going to be pinch hitting for Ryan McMahon from Cambridge Mobile Telematics. I won't do this near as well as him. Those of you who've had the opportunity to hear Ryan speak, he is a great partner in traffic safety, and Cambridge Mobile Telematics is really helping us move the needle for data and information so that we can help share why technology is important to help us combat this, really the epidemic of distracted driving. Next slide, please. So Cambridge Mobile Telematics is a telematics provider that is international, that is international, and they are the technology behind a lot of apps and technologies that you may or may not have in your vehicle or on your cell phone. So they have 37 million drivers since 2015 and 10 million drivers who are registered monthly on platforms associated with their technology. Next slide, please. So this is IoT technology, which is the technology that Cambridge Mobile Telematics utilizes to get data and information from driver behavior, is all located in is cell phone based, and it's powerful sensors that detect the risks that drivers take on whenever they're driving, whether they're interacting with their cell phone or not. But today we're really going to focus on that that risk-based behavior that they can measure that has a real influence on distracted driving. So they have right now and this, I think it's important to note that this is an opt-in technology. This is a technology that drivers or phone users opt in. It's not something that that is being taken from phone records or anything like that. It's all data that is opted in whenever a user downloads the application. And then it's monitored by GPS and all of the technology that you see on the screen here to measure the driver's behavior as they're going through a drive. Next slide, please. So how drivers interact with technology, with telematics technology. If you have drivers utilizing some smartphone applications that you may be familiar with, such as like State Farm, Progressive, Nationwide, insurance companies are offering these as like a risk-based approach. And so no data is sold and the data is all de-identified. No personal information is exchanged in these data exchanges. And insurance companies are offering discounts that may be available based on the driver's interaction with as they're driving, whether they how many hard braking activities they have, time spent speeding and things like that. Are they interacting, actually touching or holding the phone? They measure this all happens when the phone is unlocked. The car is driving over 10 miles an hour and the driver is interacting with the phone in some way. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of the participation in these insurance programs that monitor those driving habits and really assign risks. So what is that driver doing that may increase their risk for a crash? And this is really where the data helps us elevate what we're doing. Because in prior, I would say in the past, those of us in traffic safety have really worked with data and information after crashes happen. And so we have to deal with how do we get information out of the driver or others who are involved in a crash in order to get much information at all on what's happening in the vehicle prior to the crash. But this technology is really giving us a snippet into what happens prior to the crash. Are individuals interacting with their phone prior to the crash? What are they doing on their phone? Are they touching it? Are they interacting with apps? And we have all kinds of data available. If you're utilizing telematics in your company, you probably have this data, whether it's in-vehicle recording or smartphone based. You have that data available on the drivers that are driving for your company. Next slide, please. So I think that one of the great things about Cambridge Mobile Telematics and the solutions and technology that they offer is they are really dedicated to bringing information into traffic safety research that we haven't had before. And so you'll see a lot of reports and things that Cambridge is participating in over the last few years to help us elevate the data that's available on distracted driving. And not just distracted driving, but speeding and other crash risk events. I know that Michelle's also going to talk about use cases for this data in Ohio and how they used it and have been using it prior to the cell phone handheld ban in Ohio and then post law. And so lots of information available to contribute to that larger body of research available on traffic safety and what causes crashes. Next slide, please. Again, these are just some examples of things that we have that CMT has contributed to over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. Next one. All right, and so really getting into the data that CMT has available, the data that they are able to provide shows that 34% of drivers were distracted the minute before they crashed. And so this really gives us a look into what's happening in the vehicle as drivers are being distracted. Can you imagine if 1/3 of the vehicles that you pass on the road are distracted in some way by their device? Next slide, please. Oh, next one. Sorry. This information, I wish Ryan was here to present this. This is a little more technical than what I'm used to. But here we're talking about, and Michelle, I think, can pipe into some of this. And I think Michelle's going to talk a lot about what happened pre your law and then post your law. Do you want to talk about this slide at all?
Yeah, I think this slide goes to the issue of well, I would say a couple things. One, Katie, you're doing a great job. It's unfortunate Ryan couldn't be here today. He's not feeling well. He really does a great job of laying out the case for how safety advocates can use telematics data to inform all the other data that we're collecting. So we're good at collecting crash data, we collect citation data, we collect volume data, but what we don't really have insight into is what people are doing with their phones while they're traveling on our public roads. And so by leveraging some of the telematics data provided by CMT and other providers, we're able to add that to the suite of data options that we have to really understand what drivers are doing and how to prevent or how to encourage them to drive more safely. So if Ryan were here today, one of the things that he would tell you is that passing hands-free laws, passing better laws with primary enforcement over secondary enforcement, all of those things are a good start, but they're very difficult to sustain. So you get a little momentum, you get a bump from that initial passage of the law for a time, people are focused on it, but then over time, there's a tendency for drivers to regress and they start interacting with their phones again. And so it goes to the issue of we really need a sustained long-term strategy, much like we did for alcohol and seatbelts. So, it took us decades to change behaviors around seatbelt use and drunk driving. And we're probably on a similar journey in terms of electronic device use, trying to prevent drivers from using them behind the wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. And Patricia asked a question, does passengers using a phone in a moving vehicle affect the data that has been collected? And I've heard Ryan talk about this, and CMT has really put a lot of effort into AI and into automating that information so they can tell the information that's being collected from the driver versus the passenger. So they can differentiate what is being collected from the driver and the passenger. Very technologically savvy algorithms that help us inform that data and make sure it's clean. If you've utilized the telematics app before, if you have probably had the option of I'm not the driver or something like that, they're not relying exclusively on that. They're also really analyzing the data to be able to provide really clean data for us. So Mandy, you want to go ahead and go to Michelle's slides? That will help us move along here.
Oh, hey, can we go back? Can we go back to just for a moment? Because that'll dovetail off of it. So go back to that one slide showing the states. So let me forward one more. There we go. So once again, CMT has done a great job of collecting cell phone data, hand motion, cell phone, handheld motion, and screen interaction. And they've been tracking it across states that have passed hands-free laws. And what this chart shows you is, again, in the 1 month before, you get to see what drivers are doing with their cell phones, how often they're interacting with them. 1 week after a law is passed, and then fast forward a few months, and you see that from the green lines, once again, without a sustained strategy to change behavior, you get a regression in behavior, and people start interacting with their phones again. The screen interaction, handheld motion goes back up. Now dovetail into my slides. So first of all, I'm going to thank the National Safety Council for inviting me to be a part of the discussion here today. I'm excited because over the next couple of slides, I'm going to share with you some of the long-term strategies that we are developing in the state of Ohio to sustain long-term behavior change around electronic device use while driving. Next slide. And you can just cycle through these since I'm not controlling it myself. So again, if Ryan were here, what he would tell you is that passing a hands-free law is a good start. The difficulty is once you pass a law, it's difficult to maintain the momentum unless you have a long-term strategy to support that behavior change that we know is needed, much like we needed it for drunk driving and seatbelt use. So in the state of Ohio, we've been thinking a lot over the past year since our law has been passed about how we sustain behavior change beyond the law. And we're looking at things like education. So in year one, you're mainly focused on educating people about the law. Over time, you need to think about how you're going to develop effective messaging to get more people to put down the devices behind the wheel. We're looking at enforcement. How do we sustain enforcement once we pass a law? That can be very difficult. How do we engage our enforcement partners in helping to educate and nudge behavior change long term? And then evaluation. And that's probably the most critical part of any long-term strategy, because we need to understand what's working and what's not so that we can improve the strategies that we have. Next slide. So let me start with legislation. Go back. So Ohio took a very important first step last year when we passed a new hands-free law. That hands-free law took effect in April, and it was the first upgrade in our distracted driving laws since we passed a secondary texting law back in 2012. Next slide. And while our hands-free law that we passed that took effect in April has several exceptions that make it a little bit more difficult to enforce, the golden ticket we got out of the law was we went from a secondary to a primary enforcement within the state. And that has been a game changer in starting to jump or into it has been a game changer in jump starting some momentum in changing behaviors across the state. And I'll share with you two examples. Next slide. So I know primary enforcement is working from two primary things. The first one is the cell phone data. So we've been working with Cambridge Mobile Telematics to get cell phone data on a regular basis. We look at that data. Once again, this is anonymized, aggregated cell phone data that people willingly share through insurance-based risk and usage-based programs. And what we know from the cell phone data is that in the months after we passed a hands-free law, we have consistently seen across the state of Ohio an 8% reduction in handheld phone use and screen interaction. And then what we do with that data is we follow it month to month and we think about, are we up or down? What strategies can we tweak to be more successful? And we share that information back out through our social media channels, and I'll share an example of that to raise awareness for the issue of distracted driving throughout the year. Next slide. I also know that primary enforcement is working from a law enforcement perspective. So this chart shows you citations, distracted driving citations written by the Ohio State Highway Patrol. And on the left hand of the chart, you'll see that in the 5 months before we passed the primary hands-free law, the Highway Patrol wrote about 3,000 distracted driving citations. But if you look at the right-hand side of the chart, you'll see that in the 5 months following the hands-free law, the beginning of the enforcement period, they wrote 6,600 distracted driving violations or citations, which is a 129% increase. And what that tells me is that law enforcement now has a better tool to stop dangerous distracted driving before it leads to a crash. So we know primary is working in our state from a law enforcement perspective. Next slide. So another important component of a long-term sustained behavior change plan is public awareness campaigns and education. Next slide. So in year one, the state of Ohio, much like other states that pass hands-free laws, they're really focused on educating a general audience about the new law. And so we developed a phonesdown.ohio.gov website. You can go there, you can download posters, tip cards, fact sheets, banners. We'll give you instructions on how to silence your notifications on your phone, how to download email signature lines to remind people about the Phones Down law. Next slide. But in year two, we're starting to think more about long-term behavior change, and we've coalesced around this strategy called Never Here, showing people all the places they can use their phones, they can choose to use them. The one place we ask you not to use your phone is behind the wheel of a car. Video.
Here, 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 even here. Never here. Phones down. It's the law. Fines start at $150.
Next slide. So once again, we're coalescing around a long-term messaging campaign. We're starting to think about how we segment the audience, target specific demographics within our messaging strategy. Once again, showing them all the places that they can use their phone, and they do use their phone, but we're just asking you to never use it behind the wheel of a car. Next slide. So we're mining a lot of data sources to figure out how to target more effective messaging long term. So one of the things that we're looking at is distracted driving crash data. So in the state of Ohio, this chart shows you that although all age ranges are engaged in some level of distracted driving crashes or responsible, the younger you are, the more likely you are to have a distracted driving crash. Next slide. There's also a tremendous amount of national research that you can leverage. So we've been looking a lot at the IIHS national survey that they did, where they asked respondents how often they use electronic devices and what capacity. And we know from the IIHS data that, once again, the younger you are, the more likely you are to use electronic devices behind the wheel. And that starts to paint a picture for us in developing our long-term strategy about where we should be focusing our efforts to develop more effective messaging. Next slide. The other interesting thing that came out of the IIHS study was what people identified as barriers to driving device free. And some of those included work responsibilities, family, and information needs. Once again, mining the data as a state and as a local government to try and figure out how you should be targeting your messaging for long-term behavior change around electronic device use while driving. Next slide. The other thing that we're doing in year 2 is thinking about how we can engage Ohio employers in encouraging safer driving and rewarding employees for doing so. Next slide. Once again, we're mining data from national survey data from IIHS and other sources. And one of the things that came out of the national survey was that drivers said that one of the things that might motivate them to change long term were workplace policies. That makes a lot of sense because we know that if you have to model certain behaviors on the clock, like I have to wear a seatbelt, I can't use my electronic device while driving, that you tend to develop those habits and you model them off the clock too. And then your social network sees that you're not doing that and maybe they adopt it as well. So it's building a safety of culture. Next slide. So one of the things that we're doing is the Department of Public Safety and the Ohio Department of Transportation are teaming with the National Safety Council to develop a suite of materials that Ohio employers can use to both encourage safe driving within the workforce and reward employees for doing it. Next slide. So we've done a number of things. We are building a website where we're identifying model policies. Here we've actually borrowed from the National Distracted Driving Coalition, their sample workplace policies on no touch and one touch. We've also identified some recommendations for successful implementation, but beyond just saying I now have a policy. Next slide. We're also leveraging resources that the NSC has already developed. Turnkey materials like posters, newsletter copy, e-learning modules, templates and tools, materials that can be easily adopted, customized, and implemented by Ohio employers to encourage safe driving across the state. Next slide. Another absolutely critical component of our long-term strategy is sustained enforcement around distracted driving. Next slide. Here, we know that enforcement is absolutely critical. We know it once again from a lot of available research. NHTSA research says that large-scale, high-visibility enforcement combined with paid earned media can reduce handheld cell phone use and texting while driving. And they also noted that the public's perception of robust enforcement is critical to reducing the behavior. And here I'm going to pause and just mention for a moment that this information is difficult to implement in an environment where we know we have historically low levels of law enforcement staff. So that's a challenge we're trying to overcome. Next slide. So in Ohio, what we've tried to do is, despite lower levels of staffing, we've tried to be more high profile with our corridors. We've identified 14 distracted driving corridors across the state. where the Department of Transportation provides the signage within the corridor, the Ohio State Highway Patrol provides the enforcement, and then we jointly promote these distracted driving corridors to raise public awareness, trying to maximize the limited resources that we have. I don't have a lot of time to touch on this today, but I will tell you that if you're going to the National Lifesavers Conference next week, my colleague, Captain Chris Kinn, will be talking more in depth about the distracted driving corridors and the Highway Patrol's efforts to incentivize distracted driving education and enforcement within their patrol outposts across the state. So if you can make that, that might be a good session. Next slide. And then the final and most important element of any long-term distracted driving behavior change strategy is evaluation. You need to evaluate how you're doing so that you can make your strategies better. Next slide. So we've done a couple of things in the state of Ohio. I've already told you how we're using telematics data, anonymized, aggregated cell phone data, millions of trips taken throughout our state every single month. We are using that to gauge how often people are interacting with their phones, whether we're up or down, and sharing that information out through our social media channels, through the governor's social media channels, public safety, and ODOT to raise awareness, keep this in the public consciousness. Next slide. We're also working on a data analysis pilot with Cambridge Mobile. They are currently helping us marry citation and crash data with telematics data or cell phone use data to evaluate our distracted driving corridors so that we can make them more effective. Next slide. We're in the final stages of finalizing that report. We're looking at 8 corridors covering 2 time periods before and after targeted enforcement began in our state. And we're comparing behavior change, speeding, cell phone interaction, handheld use, comparing it in heavily enforced distracted driving corridors versus lightly enforced or non-enforced corridors. Again, to see how effective it is so that we can improve our strategies and pair it with some public education and media campaigns. Next slide. We're mining the data for things like what type of cell phone interaction people are engaged in, the frequency and duration of the use, the day of week, the time of day. All of these are important insights we can use to refine our strategies, whether it's a media strategy or an enforcement strategy. Next slide. And then the final thought I will leave you with today is that I believe we are stronger together. Next slide. And in Ohio, we've learned that we can lengthen the reach of our strategies by combining funding sources and working together. So every single strategy that I shared with you today, it bears the logo of the Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Safety. And that's because since day one of passing a new law, we have worked together, developing a long-term strategy and sharing funding, including 402 grants from NHTSA, HSIP funds from FHWA, and state funding provided by the state of Ohio. And all of these things are being combined so that we can fund a long-term sustainable strategy around enforcement, public education, and a well-developed media plan. So with that, that is my final slide of the day. I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you so much. The First Lady of Safety is a perfect title for you. I love that so much. And Natalie had a question that I can take a stab at, but I think you're probably have more experience. And she said, on average, how long does it take to go from a secondary to primary law? I think this is like a 3-part question. Missouri won't start collecting fines until 2025, but their secondary law was active in 2023. So yes, that takes some time for the courts to kind of get all of everything set up. And then how do we get enforcement on our side? And I know you just touched on the importance of working together and kind of getting all of the agencies on the same page as far as how are we going to build messaging around this that's cohesive? How are we going to educate not only motorists, but also all of the stakeholders in the highway safety sphere kind of to rally around this issue? What's your thoughts there? From going to primary to secondary specifically?
Yeah, let's start with
that. It's a little bit of a jump. Yeah.
So it literally took us about 4 years of hardcore grassroots coalition building and lobbying at the state legislature, and a governor who really put a lot of political capital behind making this happen. It took us 4 years to get a primary law from when we first started talking about it, lobbying about it, to getting it done. We did have a 6-month grace period that was before enforcement started, and that was kind of an opportunity to educate motorists, educate the courts, law enforcement officers, get everybody on board so that when enforcement started, we could hit the ground running. I'm not going to tell you that we have all the enforcement elements figured out. I know that we started with a great relationship with the Ohio State Highway Patrol. They're dedicated to traffic enforcement. They work for the governor. The governor and the Highway Patrol are very committed to making sure that this distracted driving law is successful in changing behavior. And from there, in year 2, we're going to be looking at how we can fan out and get local law enforcement agencies more involved. And I'm hoping that first step is at National Lifesavers next week, when Captain Ken can start sharing some strategies for how to overcome this enforcement environment where we have shortages in staff, but we have a great need to enforce the new law. So I think he'll have some insights next week.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it
Yeah.
takes, leadership from the top as well. You talked about your governor's support of traffic safety, but also in those smaller departments that may not have the staff to be able to say, write a distracted driving ticket. They have to be almost directed, from their leadership that this is a priority that our city or our municipality is taking. And on the state level, it sometimes is a little bit easier, because it's a megaphone, and then the trickle down effect takes some time. I think we've seen that across all of the states. We are so far along in seatbelt use compared to where we were 40 years ago, and it's taken us 40 years to get to 90% compliance for seatbelt use. So here we are talking about another issue that might take some time, but it's going to take all of us working together, kind of speaking the same language, talking to our elected officials, talking to our leadership in organizations. I think that from a workplace standpoint and from a workplace perspective, you think about what can I do? I may not be able to, talk about this on a large scale, but if you as an employer or as leaders in an organization, first have a policy. What does your policy say about utilizing cell phones while you're driving, either on or off the job? If your employees are participating in your health insurance, they're covering your behavior on and off the job. I think that that's an important thing that we talk about for employers, is the cost of what it costs to prevent these crashes versus what it costs to treat individuals after a crash. And so I really think that employers can take a look at that and make a decision that it's important that we invest in this. Maybe it's a culture of, I know that my employees are driving and I am not going to set the expectation that they pick up my phone call whenever they're driving. If I know that they're driving, or is it expected that if you do have to take a work call, that you're pulling over to the side of the road at a safe location and dedicating that time to talking or to answering an email or to a text message or a Teams message or whatever it be? Building that culture that is allowing for safety, I think, is of utmost importance.
I love that call to action, because a lot of the survey data would say that one of the barriers to going hands-free or not using a device behind the wheel are work demands. And so it's very easy for a manager to tell staff, I don't want you answering any calls while you're on the road. I'm willing to wait. And that's a good start. That's a call to action that anybody could do on this call.
Absolutely. I love that. Greg asked the question, are you going to address the dangers of hands-free driving? The problem with hands-free laws is that drivers assume hands-free is safe and okay. And I think that you're right. When we talk about the 3 main types of distractions, we're talking about, that cognitive distraction of listening to a phone call, listening to a podcast, listening to whatever you're doing, when your primary responsibility should be focused on that drive. And absolutely, hands-free is not risk-free. And I think traffic safety professionals as a whole recognize that, and we can do a better job of messaging that hands-free is not risk-free. Even if you're not taking your hands off the wheel, you can still be distracted. And really, again, empowering employees to dedicate their full time and attention to the act of driving. And we have a lot of resources available during this month. National Safety Council is going to be putting out lots of information on distracted driving. All of the programs funded by the partnership that Michelle talked about in the states of Ohio, Louisiana, and Texas are all free and available to you to download from the web pages. Please take advantage of that. There's videos, there's coaching cards, all kinds of resources where you can utilize in your workplace. Also, bringing the attention to the month, like Michelle talked about, really amplifying enforcement. You may not hear about enforcement taking place this month, but you also just join the collective effort to bring attention to distracted driving during this month. We have social media kits. You can join in online in any of the conversations that you're having in your organization, and reach out to us. If you need a speaker or you need resources for your presentation, please let us know, and we'd be happy to arm you with the information that you might need to help raise awareness that makes sense in your organization. Others have questions, comments, anything for our panel today? Michelle did a great job of highlighting the resources that are available on Our Driving Concern, but Nebraska is also on the site. Absolutely. Nebraska is one of our chapters of the National Safety Council, who are, a huge part of this effort to bring awareness to distracted driving, but also to a lot of other risky behaviors that happen behind the wheel, impaired driving, seatbelt use, all things that we've heard and talked about today. We have tools and resources to help you kind of bring traffic safety to the forefront of your priorities as an organization. I know that sometimes it falls under, things that we'll get to when we get to it, or, OSHA doesn't require us to do that. So it's not like high on our priority list. But I would really encourage you to make traffic safety a priority this month and every month, but we have lots of tools to help make that happen this month. Someone asked how to get in touch with John. We'll get with you offline and share his information. Thank you to John for sharing your impactful story. And just a reminder that this behavior affects all of us, and it can have an impact on your family, on your friends, on your coworkers every day. And it really is going to take all of us making that decision to drive distraction free, wear a seatbelt, not drive impaired, to save lives on our roadways. Anybody else have last minute thoughts or questions before we close? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Deanne. We do have some last minute housekeeping information. Thank you for joining us today. Deanne?
All right, thank you. You will see 2 QR codes on the screen. The one on your left is our evaluation. If you can click on that QR code, we appreciate your feedback. We want to know your comments on this session, and you have the availability to comment on future things that you'd like to see. So again, it's a quick evaluation. And then the one on the right is where you can access your free Distracted Driving Awareness Month resources through the National Safety Council. And so you can click on that QR code as well. And I will follow up in the coming days with a post communication email to all who attended. We'll put these QR codes in there as well, and then just any follow-up information that might be helpful to you as we go through a DDAM month. And I would like to say a big thank you to our panel of experts. The knowledge that they provide on transportation safety is invaluable. We also want to thank you for attending today. We know your time is valuable and you chose to spend this hour with us, and we hope that you gained valuable information that you can take forward and use right away. And with that, that concludes our webinar. And we hope that you have, again, gained valuable information today. We want you to take with you and share across your organizations, with your employees, your families, and your communities. And with that, that concludes the session today. And we thank you and be safe.